Societal death. Just add MGTOW. Answering a MGTOW thought experiment. So in this video, I'm trying a little bit of a different approach. I'm experimenting with the medium of an infographic, but instead of exploring one of my own ideas or making a larger critique of societal forces, I'm using this as a quick reply, basically to confront a specific thought experiment brought up by a vlogger, and also to outline more general problems with the MGTOW movement overall. So for people who haven't been watching my channel recently, they may not know that I've been in a little bit of a debate with many people from the MGTOW movement. This stands broadly for men going their own way, and it's a type of radical men's rights movement. It portrays the male role in modernity as being very negative, and while it has some very, very good critiques of modernity, the thing that really sets it aside from the MRA, the MRM, and the other traditionalist movements that aren't rights-based is the fact that it really urges men to step away from society in general, and to step away from women in marriage. Now, obviously, as a traditionalist, I've had a number of problems with this, and this has led me to debate people like Turd Flinging Monkey, among others. But in my conversations with Turd Flinging Monkey, I don't feel that I was really able to elaborate on my main critique of MGTOW. It seems largely that MGTOWs understand that modernity is a deeply flawed enterprise. They also understand that modernity in itself is not stable, and that the MGTOW philosophy is not going to heal this instability. When I got into a debate with Turd Flinging Monkey, or rather just a conversation, we both agreed largely that the marriage culture in the modern world was broken. And Turd Flinging Monkey proposed that men just take their ball and go home, not participate in marriage, not foster the next generation. To which I gave the obvious counter-reply that this is a totally ineffective way of dealing with the problem. Not only will this doom society to collapse, but there's not even any evidence that it will even have a chance of working. Whereas in some cases, females collectively taking their ball and going home has worked in the past, in the case of men, no mass defection of men has ever resulted in anything other than invasion and subjugation of the population that attempts this tactic. Therefore, a MGTOW philosophy will be ineffective in warding off any societal collapse, and will only result in your society collapsing faster than everyone else's. To which Turd Flinging Monkey replied that MGTOW would indeed be a good philosophy to carry over into a post-collapse world, something that I felt was highly questionable. Well, luckily enough for me, another MGTOW vlogger called The Groundwork for the Metaphysics of MGTOW was kind enough to put a thought experiment that explored just this question into the form of a video that he published earlier this month. I'm going to play a brief clip where he puts forward a thought experiment that really takes on this main issue.
I want to conduct a MGTOW thought experiment as to a doomsday scenario leaning on MGTOW thought to help and see what people would choose. So, in the spirit of inquiry, let us set the stage. Over the course of 1 year, the entire world is at war. Some governments, who feared the worst, set up underground bunkers scattered around the world. Each bunker is completely self-contained. It has enough food and water to last for 5 years. In addition to this, the bunkers were set up to let some survive the worst of it, if only to emerge to a lawless, sparsely populated world. A group of survivors finds one of these bunkers. The bunker can only hold 10 people, but the group is 20 people in size. You cannot attempt to fit more than 10 people, because the oxygen will only sustain 10 for the 5-year period of lockdown. If you put in 11 people or more, they will all die before the doors of the bunker unlock due to suffocation. You can, however, choose to take less than 10.
So, just to overview the thought experiment as stated. We are hypothesizing some massive disaster worldwide that is going to take out most of the human population, and we have provision over a small bunker that can house about 10 people. We have to decide how to use that space in order to make sure that whatever appears on the opposite end of this disaster will have a good chance of survival and a good chance of carrying forward our society and lifestyle, making sure it prevails in the post-apocalyptic world. Now, as a kicker, the vlogger who proposed this thought experiment has included several dossiers, 20 to be exact. 9 of them are men with a variety of skills that are explicitly detailed. I had to cut it off for time considerations. 10 more of them are female, also with a number of skills and potential disadvantages. And then the 20th one is none other than turd-flinging monkey himself, the red pill person, the MGTOW voice, and that largely represents the value of including MGTOW ideas in the coming society. Now, broadly, the question under consideration here is how we decide to split up the space in between men and women. From a very broad point of view, the males in the dossier have more skills, more survival skills. They tend to be stronger. The women seem like they have more clerical skills, and oftentimes have a number of disadvantages that make them useless, aside from their very, very valuable reproductive capacities. Finally, the turd-flinging monkey choice is just there to indicate the relative value of the MGTOW philosophy. Here we see sort of the question laid bare. How would we divide up these slots in order to create an ideal society? And what is the MGTOW philosophy worth in an emerging survivalist and traditionalist society that will naturally need to come into the new world? Now, I think the vlogger who proposed this problem was a little bit overly ambitious. He provided 20 detailed dossiers and asked people to come up with what they thought was the most effective combination to survive the post-apocalyptic world, with very few details in what that post-apocalyptic world would entail. So the problem is a little bit too general. There's too many good solutions. There's too few ways to eliminate bad solutions. This is what people in the optimization field oftentimes call a bin packing problem. It's a huge combinatoric problem. So essentially we have 20 pretty good options and 10 ways of choosing them, which leads to over 150,000 different options, and very few of these are prohibitively bad. So there really is no way to solve this problem in all eventualities. We have to develop general strategies. We have to look at what would be our rough strategy when picking people in order to discuss the general philosophical ideas that I think the groundwork for the metaphysics of MGTOW is really getting at in this problem. So I think we should just examine a few discrete scenarios and talk about broad categories of people we might put in our 10 slots in order to ensure the optimal survival of our colony. So the way that we generally handle these very complex problems is we break it down into scenarios. Just a general grouping of scenarios we think might pertain in the final circumstance, in this case the post-apocalypse. We can then come up with broad strategies that would be optimally suited to confronting these scenarios, and discuss how relatively different they are. This also gives us a good eye to making a mixed scenario, where we don't really know what's going to go on, and we can see what the middle ground would be. So, in the case of the post-apocalypse, we can have 3 scenarios that are largely different to each other. In the first scenario I like to consider, we have to consider the possibility that post-apocalypse, it's still a very dangerous world out there. The apocalypse itself hasn't fully subsided. There might be radiation, there might be zombie gangs, there might be wild animals, and the humans that come back into that world are going to be in constant danger. They're going to be in constant need of survival. They have very, very little chance to grow a society, and they're mainly just concerned with staying alive. In this scenario, what we're really going to go for is a high survival strategy. Here we're going to have a lot of people who are picked for their capacity to make the group survive, and really the idea of breeding and growing a new colony is a secondary consideration. So our strategy subsequently is going to have a lot of people picked for skills, very few people picked for breeding, and because of that, we're likely to have a skew towards the male side of the population, due to the fact that the men in the dossiers provided by the initial blogger had more survival skills, and the women had significantly less. Because of this, we get a little bit of a gender imbalance, but due to the fact that we're expecting high danger, probably we can expect a mortality rate of 2 or 3 men, and in the end, given that our group survives, we'll likely have parity when it comes to creating a new colony, although it will be significantly harder because of the lower numbers. Still, the priority is survival. We can't consider growing at all in this scenario. Okay, so that scenario being explored, what do we have for the second scenario? The second scenario is really the contrast. After the apocalypse, there really is no danger. The apocalypse happened, it's over and done with. everything's still intact, and really all we need to do is flick on the switches, get the generators running, and then society's back up to normal. And really, our main concern is the fact that there just aren't enough people to man the switches. There aren't enough people to man the typewriters and the computers that really bring society back up to a buzz. There's no concern for danger. We're just trying to grow, baby. So in this scenario, we want something that's more like a high repopulate strategy. This is sort of the Doctor Strangelove example, where, in the movie Doctor Strangelove, he proposes I think it's a 10-to-1 female to male ratio. In this case, we might have 3 men and 7 women. It's a little less than the Doctor Strangelove one, but it's the same basic idea. We're trying to get the population growth up, and because of that, the breeding selects are premium. And when it comes to breeding and creating the new generation, women are the limiting factor in the process. Therefore, we need more women in our colony in order for it to fulfill this function. It's fairly self-explanatory. We're also assuming in this scenario that we're not getting a lot of competition from other colonies that might be coming up around us and trying to outcompete us for resources, trying to outcompete us for technological skills. And therefore, we don't really care the quality, we're just interested in quantity of repopulation. Of course, in the third scenario, maybe we do have high competition. Maybe there are a lot of communities that came out from the bunkers and might be competing with us for a society that is still largely intact. So there's low danger, but we're still really interested in getting the edge, especially the edge in the next generation. Here we want a strategy that has a eugenic edge to it. We want to have the best people. And so because of this, we're going to have more skill selects due to the fact that we want higher quality people, and relatively high breeding selects, but this time we want more of an edge towards quality of breeder rather than the quantity. So women are a little bit less of a high commodity here, we still want slightly more of them, and men are selected largely for the fact that they can carry on a good gene pool, and we have more men because we need more genetic diversity in order to make this strategy work, in order to get the eugenic edge in the end. Now, of course, scenario 4 is more just a placeholder. This is sort of the unknown scenario. We don't know what's going to happen, so we have to prepare for all eventualities. And because of that, what we're going to have is sort of a mixture of the high survival, high repopulate, and high eugenic strategies. Here we have basically the mix strategy. We kind of mix and match, and because, the 2 repopulation strategies are higher women and the high survival strategy is higher men, probably the mix strategy will be more or less parity between the genders. And of course, the selections will be half breeding, half skill select. You could vary it up, seeing how the different combinations work, but that's more or less what you would get. And you can see these would be largely the 4 strategies we might consider going forward into one of these scenarios. Alright, so now that we've discussed our basic strategies going forward in each of the scenarios, how does the addition of turd-flunking monkey really make a difference? How does the addition of the MGTOW component really make a difference? Now, I know that when the original vlogger introduced the thought experiment, turd-flunking monkey was one of the actual volunteers that could be included in the strategy. But I'm going to make the scenario even easier. Let's say that we had just a turd-flinging monkey slot that was reserved just for him. He could come along even if it didn't involve kicking out any of the other members in our 10-member team. He would just be an added benefit or an added detriment. And we could ask ourselves, in the abstract, how would each of these strategies change if we included somebody with the MGTOW and red pill philosophy? The philosophy that largely reminds men how much risk they take, how much dying they have to do, historically and contemporarily, the kind of philosophy that encourages men not to marry. How much is that worth to us in this new, pioneering traditionalist society that needs to retake the world, evade danger, and repopulate? Let's take a look at each individual scenario. So, in the first high survival scenario, let's say that we add the turd-flinging monkey with the MGTOW philosophy. Now, of course, in this scenario, the men are going to be taking an enormous amount of risk. This is a high danger world, and there's going to be a lot of fighting, a lot of running, a lot of dying. The men are taking that risk. The women most likely won't be. The women most likely can't. They're not going to be strong enough, and moreover, if they do try to take those risks, they're only going to get other people killed. So add the MGTOW philosophy, immediately the men will be more aware that they're taking more of the risk. Keep in mind, we're expecting 2 or 3 of them to die, and they probably know that. With the MGTOW philosophy in hand, they'll immediately be conscious of how unfair that is, how much easier the women have it, and how much they should really resent them for having the gynocentric female privilege they always knew they had, because they're all red-pilled now. So of course, now that the men resent the women, they're probably going to defend them less. They're probably going to take less risks in order to save them. And of course, as a consequence, the women are going to be exposed to more risk, and they're going to die at much higher rates. And while we can accept 2 or 3 men dying on this team, we lose 1, 2 women, that colony is dead. So with this philosophy, we can expect a death by violence almost certainly. Okay, but maybe that's not the end of the story. There's other scenarios we still have to consider, right? So let's take a look at the high repopulate strategy. This, of course, is a less dangerous world. Moreover, in this strategy, we also have many more women. So it stands to reason that this would be less gynocentric, the ideal world for the MGTOW. But what happens if we add turd-flinging monkeys MGTOW philosophy into this mix? Well, as we said before, most of the skill selects are still men. So the men are going to have way more skills than the women are. Moreover, since the women are mainly just breeding, the men are going to have to do more of the work. They're going to get like 3 concubines, but they're going to have to actually work to support these women. These women are going to be pregnant all the time, and because of that, the men are going to have to pick up most of the slack. So therefore, the MGTOW philosophy will come in again and encourage men to resent women because they have less skills, and they largely do less work. In turn, the women who are going to be constantly pregnant are going to resent men for their elitism, and there's going to be contentious attitudes develop because of this MGTOW philosophy. You're going to have a lot of people angry at each other. And of course, there's not very much danger. Probably, electricity is running, all the amenities of life are back running very, very quickly. What happens if one of the men decides that he wants to become a MGTOW monk? He's just not going to work to support his 3 concubines. He's going to leave that to the other men, just go back to playing video games, go back to doing his thing because everything's back up in society. That means you lose one of your 3 men in society, and you are going to die a inbreeding death. There's not going to be enough genetic diversity. All it takes is one defection by a man in the society to bring the entire colony to its knees, because there's not going to be enough diversity. And here, MGTOW has hurt, if not killed, the community because of its own contentious nature. Alright, well, now let's look at the last one, the high eugenic strategy. Now here we have a little bit more genetic diversity. Maybe one of our men could defect. But of course, the same introduction to MGTOW is going to create the resentment between men and women, because again, the men have more skills, and the women are forced to do more pregnancy labor. And if you go take the MGTOW route of saying how easy it is for women to have children, they're going to resent that. Now keep in mind the eugenic strategy was developed for a world where there's a lot of competition between groups. In this world, you're not the only one who went down into the bunker, and there's other people who might offer women a better deal. So in this case, you might lose a lot of your high-quality women just to defection. They could defect and go to other societies. Moreover, men from other societies could come in and take over yours. So in this instance, although you don't have the immediate death to violence or inbreeding as you did in the other scenarios, you could have death by defection or death by essentially invasion, because you've got competition you have to worry about. And of course, the same is true for the mixed strategies. I don't know if it's going to be violence, inbreeding, or defection, but the MGTOW philosophy will encourage resentment between the sexes, and one of these 3 ends will naturally befall them, regardless of what happens otherwise. Men and women need to work together. MGTOW discourages that. Therefore, I don't know what will kill them, but if the MGTOW philosophy is prominent in this community, there will be death. At this point, we can return to the question that kicked off this thought experiment. What is the relative value of having MGTOW philosophy in a society emerging after a huge cataclysm or utter societal collapse? And I think that we've seen in all of the scenarios I've laid out just how destructive MGTOW is. It will encourage men to not defend women and therefore expose them to more risk. It will encourage men to potentially defect and not breed with women, therefore making the society at risk of inbreeding and low genetic diversity. And it will encourage defection by both men and women, which will lead to the society being vulnerable to infiltration and exploitation. In each of these scenarios, the MGTOW has done nothing but undermine us. Therefore, we have to conclude that in any scenario, we would have to refuse MGTOW philosophy, even if it were a free addition into our society, even if it cost us nothing to carry forward. Even if it were just a free thing that we could either accept or deny, we would have to deny it, because it would undermine the very instincts that we needed, and we would need in the future society, to keep us alive and functioning as a bi-gender species. In this case, even if we did have the space for turd-flinging monkey, I would have to say no to his addition into the team. I don't know, maybe we could include a bunch of Bibles in his slot. It would certainly be better ideology to build a community on, I can guarantee you that. End of Societal Death. Just add MGTOW.